And let's shifting back over to Ankara, where the NATO summit is starting today. There's even more going. If you can say and just kind of wag your head on this guy. He's a young guy. He doesn't know anything, but it's a lot different when it's somebody who's supposed to know something, especially the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, who is going to, in this clip here, is starting a path that you can see that is very much symptomatic and systematic into demonizing Russia to make everybody want to go to war with them.
The idea of loyalty to the United States, do you think that's important within NATO?
Well, of course, it's loyalty to everyone, to everybody. This is how this alliance has been created. 32 nations being totally loyal to each other. That means that an attack on one is an attack on all. The Article 5, the fact that we all agree that Russia is the long-term threat. Look at the declaration we agreed on in The Hague last year. We will come out with a new declaration on Wednesday. Of course, I cannot talk about that, but I have every confidence that it will be very strongly worded again.
Doug, what is it? What can we surmise from the fact that you have the Secretary General, just like his predecessor, Jens Stoltenberg, who never even contemplated any kind of diplomacy or an off-ramp and only went down the path of more military? Is there any prospect, maybe I'm missing something, is there any prospect that by demonizing Russia and turning them into a permanent enemy, that somehow it can result in something good for the alliance?
I think he must have finished recently reading Alexander Dumas' Three Musketeers. He's confusing the Three Musketeers with the 30-plus members of NATO. Everybody in NATO has a different perspective. This is the problem with the alliance. It's why Eisenhower opposed the expansion of the alliance when he was president. In fact, he wanted to neutralize countries in most of Eastern Europe, make them neutral states. He said, first of all, we don't have the military power and the wherewithal in the United States to defend all these countries against the Soviets. He said, secondly, he didn't buy into the notion that the Soviets were hell-bent for another war on the scale of the Second World War. He knew too much about the war. He had an appreciation for the destruction wrought against the Soviets. So his view was, let's make these places neutral, and that included Poland. I think ultimately, if he'd had the opportunity, he probably would have signed on for that in Germany as well. But my point is this. Rutte is an empty suit. So is Stoltenberg. These people were picked by Washington, D.C., by this cabal of neocons, globalists, whatever you want to call them, Zionists, the whole crowd together in Washington, D.C. He's our man. He's going to keep this war going. He'll sustain it. He'll do whatever we tell him. I mean, I once heard from a Secretary of the Navy who was asked by the Secretary of Defense, is there anybody you want to get rid of? And this man turned around and said, yeah, I want to be rid of this CNO, the Chief of Naval Operations. And the Secretary of Defense said, oh, no, you can't do that. He said, well, why not? He said, I'm going to make him the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He said, what? This man's not competent. He's made a mess of everything in the Navy. Why would you do that? He said, because he's the only man I know who will do exactly what I tell him. Okay, now that's within the last 35 years. So what you're seeing is essentially the same thing play out. NATO is an empty facade. These are states with Lilliputian organizations. Now let's back up a minute. Let's look at Warsaw. A lot of things have been happening in Poland, and people aren't paying attention to them. There was quite a serious falling out, if you will, between the Ukrainians and the Poles. Now, having millions of Ukrainians pour into Poland as refugees hasn't helped matters. Historically, the Ukrainians and Poles have had trouble dealing with each other as it is. But recently, what we've seen is that the president of Poland, Nawrocki, has withdrawn the Order of the Eagle, White Eagle, which is the highest honor that you can confer on someone, from Zelensky and bringing it back to Poland. And Zelensky said, take your white chicken back and have it. And then subsequently, the Polish government has decided to declassify the contents of all the shipments of arms and equipment that are being sent to Ukraine from Poland. Well, this is a very good thing, because as people go through this, and I don't think you're going to see a lot of attention given to it here in the United States, probably not in the globalist controlled Western European states either, excuse me. But I think what you're going to find out is that vast quantities of this were pilfered, stolen, resold on the black market, misused, abused, and so forth. The Poles are waking up. Now, the population of Poland has for some time, to the tune of 55 to 60%, been opposed to entering any war against Russia. I think that's important since they're on the front line. Now they've fallen out with Ukraine, which they regard increasingly as a criminal organization. They don't even see it as a real state anymore. It's a country, but not a real nation state in the way that we normally think of it. Now that's just Poland, but Poland is a big chunk of NATO. People don't realize this. The Poles probably have the best army on the European continent. Polish troops are excellent, well-disciplined, well-trained, and the Poles are happy to maintain an even larger army, regardless of whatever pressure we put on them. That has nothing to do with it. But the point is, NATO itself is finished. Its members are not comfortable. They're not happy. People are going through the motions. There is very little unity of action and unity of purpose in NATO. I don't expect to see any emerge. And once again, it's because if you go to Stockholm and then you fly down to Lisbon or Madrid, the views of the world are very different. You cannot expect Meloni in Rome to share the same view of the world that is common in Helsinki. Now, having said that, we should talk a little bit about the potential for extreme stupidity in North East Europe right now.
Well, and that's actually what I do. I know we're running short on time here, so I'll just kind of run through a lightning here because it all is all connected here. We have a number of things. You talk about NATO doesn't have any consensus. At least some of the elite leaders are trying to tie everybody together to something that's going to stir something. Because like here just today, 8 tankers were attacked in the Russian shadow fleet in the Azov area, on top of 2 that were the day before. Bryansk and Belgorod were attacked again successfully by the Ukrainian side into Russia. And then you had here this the leader in Finland that said he supports Ukraine's intensifying drone strikes deep within Russia. You had let's see, the new Latvian prime minister who came out and said, yes, I'm hosting 14 military contingents from NATO countries as a warning to Russia. And then we had this gem here where Vovan and Lexus, the well-known Russian pranksters, got together with the leader and one of the presidential supporters, Madrid's role in Tallinn, and he said, hey, we'll be happy to help Kiev with attacks on St. Petersburg. And he promised its support and coordination, and even admitted that the Estonian air defense has holes. But it turned out to just be a hoax. But the fact that he's willing to do that, I mean, what do you make of all this stuff, Doug? Because when you add this one last piece here, Germany plans on a sharp rise in its defense spending, $125 billion just next year. It's like a 1/3 increase in a single year. Russia can't ignore all of these things because this is not just rhetoric. A lot of these are actions. What is the implication for security here, and what will Russia do?
Well, let's dismiss Germany up front. Whatever they allocate to defense, it would take 10 years to build a German army. There is effectively not much of an army there right now. In order to build something capable of taking on and fighting a force like the modern Russian army, 10 years. Having said that, Germany is increasingly reaching that point of almost total deindustrialization. I don't know how much longer the German state and economy will survive. I mean, if anybody can stretch it out, it's the Germans. They can always make something from nothing. But the population is very restive. And again, what will it take for the population to be rid of Merz and the people in Berlin? I don't know, but I think it's probably closer than many of us realize. And I'll know more because I'm headed to Germany in the near future, and I'll find out a little bit more about what's actually happening on the ground. Now, having said that, let's go back to the others. My sources tell me that this man in Finland is in fact a CIA asset. I'm not an intelligence expert, but I would encourage those who are, and you know who some of them are, to dig into that because I've gotten that from some very reliable sources. That wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't be the first time we've done this. But for him to successfully take Finland from a very successful economic state, and I would argue a very successful society, and turn it into a bulwark of American imperial intervention in Northeast Europe and Scandinavia is quite an achievement. It's astonishing. Now we know that the Finns have had problems for a long time with the Soviets. Their experience under Soviet rule or with the Soviets was never good. They weren't terribly happy to be under Russian rule, but their experience with the Soviets during and after the Second World War were not good. But they managed to navigate those waters successfully and come out the winners, I would argue, on the other side. So it's a great tragedy. Why they want to invite destruction by putting nuclear weapons from the United States or anywhere else on their soil in close proximity to European Russia is a mystery to me. Makes no sense. The Russians now, of course, have to deal with this, as you point out. Even though they think this is insane, they look at this and say, well, if they're going to do this, we can't sit here and do nothing in response. That's the problem. And unfortunately, it's not just the Finns, it's the Swedes. And in both Finland and Sweden, there was no referendum. You're not talking about nations of hundreds of millions of people. You have, 8 or 9 million Swedes, 5 million Finns. You can hold a referendum. Do we join NATO or not? I think if you'd held referendums in those countries, they wouldn't have joined. I think we bought off, bribed, say whatever you want, these governments to join the alliance. And they tried to convince, and I guess it successfully persuaded some, that they're more safe and secure with us present in their country than they would be otherwise. They could not be more wrong. And all they have to do to find evidence for this is look at the Persian Gulf. Look at the states on the western side of the Persian Gulf, all the way up to Kuwait. What in the hell are they thinking? It's insane. That is not a prescription for future strategic security. It's a prescription for certain destruction under the wrong circumstances. And again, you've also got to turn your attention back to the Russians. The Russians, and you know this from your personal experience, they're great people, but they have reasons for insecurity. They have a long history of dealing with everyone from the Mongols all the way up through the French and then the Germans and so forth. They are worried about defending their country. Remember, Russia's borders are largely indefensible. They're flat, they're open, they're easily penetrated. And so now you want to put nuclear weapons in proximity to them in a place like Finland or Sweden. I mean, I can't conceive of any dumber idea. And in fact, again, if you go back to Eisenhower, you can read, I guess not everybody can, but those who have clearances can go in and read in the files of the National Security Council staff the various memoranda that Eisenhower penned himself, because Eisenhower discovered he was his own best author. And so he inevitably had to dictate to General Goodpaster, who was his military assistant, effectively the first national security advisor. And he got fed up and he said, no, listen, I'm going to dictate this to you. This is what we're going to do. And he made the point that putting nuclear weapons on the ground at the time in Germany was extremely hazardous, because he said there's very little hope in the opening hours of a conflict, given the posture of Soviet forces, the number of forces we have on the ground, that we can prevent these nuclear stockpiles. And you know where they are as an Army officer. You were over there and you know where the air bases are. We can't prevent these from being overrun and captured. Now, this is 1955, 1956, 57. The whole idea is, frankly, insane. It makes no sense. None whatsoever. But if anything did make sense, we wouldn't be talking, would we?
I guess not. Last question here before we let you go. Where does this go? Is there any prospect that we just stumble through this and it doesn't end up blowing up anywhere? Or it is NATO condemning itself for there to be a clash with Russia? What do you think?
President Putin, I think, has waited with some justification for turnover in the governments in Europe. His expectation is he knows the true state of affairs in Germany. He has good information on that. He has friends in Germany, and they're telling him the truth. And the truth is everybody hates Merz, and Merkel is now regarded in the history of the German-speaking peoples as probably one of the greatest traitors they've ever had in their midst. I mean, it's common for people to say, Hitler went overboard and did terrible damage to us. Merkel has been worse. Look what she has done to us. I mean, you hear these kinds of things. So I think he's been waiting for change there. I think we may see real change come first in Great Britain. I mean, you have these roving gangs of Muslim men, largely but not exclusively Pakistani, essentially hunting people in various English cities. And the rape gangs are not gone. They've been suppressed somewhat, but they're still there. I think the British people are very close to exploding. So Britain is probably now candidate number one for total civil unrest and change in government. I used to think it would be France. I still hold out for the French because I think they're even more revolutionary in character. But as long as the French population receives its pensions, its goodies from the state, they're probably not going to take much action. But that could change. And that could change very suddenly because all of the governments are leveraged to the hilt. Everyone faces the same problem. We are all deeply in debt, way in over our heads. And the ability of the globalist financiers to manage this, I think, is coming to an end. And whatever happens here financially is going to have a terrible impact in Europe. Everybody knows that. So I guess it's a matter of waiting and watching and managing the various explosive events until they really happen someplace and you set it all in motion. It's not like World War I. We don't have real nations as we did in World War I. And by that, I mean these large nation states and imperial structures. But it's similar insofar as everybody knew, based on the Balkan Wars and the problems there would be conflict in Europe. It's just that nobody knew what would set it off. Nobody knew where it would happen and when it would happen. And in fact, when it first happened in the Balkans and Serbia, the stock market in London didn't even react because most people in Britain saw no reason why they should become involved in a war involving anything that happened in the Balkans. But everything changed.
Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see how it's going to work out. But back to your original concept that we'll fight until we run out of missiles. That day is not that far off, especially if we get into one where both sides get used it. But